Cool. So we're going to talk about our book club, the first half of it at least. It's a relatively short book on Who Moved My Cheese. Let's see here. We like to talk about in the first section, or actually all sections, is what stood out to you the most from the section. Why don't we start there? What stood out to everybody the most? I think for me, it was short, lots of interesting little quotes that really resonated with me. And also, one thing the author didn't mention, I guess, as I'll bring that up, is they didn't mention the shame associated with accepting change, which they didn't. I don't think it was something big to leave out compared to everything else, but it's something I noticed. So I guess I'll go over all the questions. What stood out the most? If I could implement one idea from reading the section, what it would be. I didn't come up with anything, but I think others did. And did I disagree with anything? I just mentioned that. So I don't know, just on order of my screen. Ali, what were your impressions?
Yeah, I agree. There are pages where they would talk about how Ha wrote some words on the wall, and pretty much all of those were pretty insightful. One thing I guess that stood out to me is beliefs. You have to sort of learn to examine your beliefs, and especially the fear of change. You have to sort of become aware of that. So that stood out to me the most, I would say. And if I could implement one idea from reading this section, become more self-aware, to add to my previous point of examining beliefs, looking for fear in my own beliefs, and looking out for signs of being stuck in a comfort zone and trying to expand and reach out a bit. And do I disagree with anything the author said? I don't really think so.
Cool. But the standard way we do book clubs at GitLab is to have an issue and a Google Doc. There's nothing in the Google Doc, so let's just chuck it and use just the issue, and then there's one place. But no, good stuff. Cool. What do you think of that, and how about your impressions?
Yeah, I think the part that resonated with me the most was just the self-reflection for Ha along his journey, and just he did such a good job of being I'm in this moment and here's what I'm going through, and here's how I should respond, his own self-motivation, which was kind of cool. I mean, it's really hard to provide self-motivation sometimes, so I was that was nice. And then also just the impact of emotions, making it really difficult to get to the end. And I think being remote and working remote just elevates that, because you're not working around other people who can kind of sense something's going on. Typically you can see it in people's body languages, and you can be hey, are you stuck? What's going on? But when you're not in that environment, you kind of have to provide that self-motivation for yourself more. The one idea that I said would be great to implement is in an IC level, implementing a self-reflection. I feel I added it to my calendar, hey, here it is on my calendar, but I don't do it. So I really liked Ha's that idea of just writing it on the wall. So my new goal is, if I achieve something and I'm really proud of it in the moment, put it on a sticky note and put it on my wall right away. So that way it's a constant self-reminder. Because I like that aspect of he was let me write it out here, and then he drew the cheese. It was constantly there for him to notice. I didn't disagree with anything the author said. I definitely, to his earlier point where he mentioned it's such a simple story that people will be very critical of it. I can completely understand where I'm I just spent this time reading this and I wanted something outstanding from it, something that would really move me. But you're it's such a simple lesson to learn that you just have to keep it top of mind.
Cool. Neil, how about you? What stood out the most? If you could implement one thing, what would it be?
Yeah, so
disagree with the author on anything.
So I'm just about halfway through the story part. Unfortunately, I had a whirlwind of events occur this weekend that derailed me, so bad excuses. But What stood out to me was the preface. The first part of the book felt like a big spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. I kind of didn't like that at first, but it really, as I started reading the story, I started picking up on things, and then the words, the meaning, the hidden meaning, the capital cheese, lowercase cheese, really stood out to me a lot more than they probably would have if I was just being told the story. I'd be like, well, this is just a silly story. But that really is like, no, there's an underlying meaning. There's something going on here. So even though I haven't finished the story, I'm really starting to just go into like, what am I seeing? I'm thinking about my personal life, career moves I've made. And I'm already starting to think, wow, I was too comfortable over here. And it was a really drastic change that I didn't really recognize as it was starting to occur until it finally impacted me enough. Like the cheese was moved, I guess. So I really like the message. I'm actually really grateful that it's a short book. I was really pleased when I got the hard copy, and it's really short, really large font. So I'm like, yes.
I didn't catch that, but that now that I'm thinking about when I was reading it, that is significantly important. Yeah. And it is short. Yeah, I set this up for many instances. As some of the other book clubs I've been in, the books were all longer. We didn't need quite a few. So, Any other impressions, Steve?
So yeah, like Ellie said, the self-awareness is that biggest takeaway so far, is just reading between the lines. Like something happens and thinking more about it, not just taking it for face value, is the really big message I'm getting out of this.
Awesome. Deborah, what were your impressions?
Sorry. So I think I might have written down the issue, and that was the visualization aspect of it. First of all, I shared it with my son, my 13-year-old, who loved it. And we had really in-depth conversations about his life, you know, and getting ready for Move Cheese. But so there's definitely the personal application. But at work, I feel like I'm inundated with explaining change and getting people on board with change a lot. So I was looking for strategies to make that easier. And the first thing I thought was, wow, it'd be great if they just read the book, right? I think having an understanding of why it's important to change is really good. So what I liked was the fact that he had to visualize it, that Hall had to visualize it before he could get comfortable. And the fact is, for anyone to buy into the change, they have to get comfortable with it. And the discomfort and the fear of what happens after I accept this change is something that if we kind of address that and give a lot of detail and make it very clear, and explain like what happens if you don't move the cheese, it gets molded, it gets old, and like explain the downside of not making a change and the upsides of making a change. And also, everyone's different. They might be a him, they might be a haw, they might be a sniff, they might be a snuff, or whatever, scrap, I forget the mice names. We have to deal with change on an individual level. Like the organization can make an announcement, which we want them to do, but I think it's really on the engineering manager to like have that connection with their individual direct report and walk them through all the phases that him and Hall had to go through. And I think it was a great book.
Okay, kind of, I think you mentioned it and somebody else earlier, is, you know, you got to know when, you got to sniff it to see if the cheese is starting to go bad over time. You know, it can really easy to get complacent. I know I have, and go, yeah, okay, it's just a little bit worse today than yesterday. And then, you know, then the next day it's a little bit worse. And you go, oh my gosh, you know, what am I doing? What am I spending my time on? You know, earlier in my career, I was definitely in those kind of states. So good stuff. Idea you'd implement. So I think you mentioned that as well, Darva. So you wrote that up. That's great write-up. Awesome. Any other impressions that folks had from the first half of the book, or the impressions of others?
So one thing I thought about is moving with the cheese. And it would be great, again, I'm all about GitLab, sorry. It'd be great if GitLab had like a history of how often we move with the cheese, and how if we didn't move with the cheese, we wouldn't be GitLab. Because a lot of people say things like, oh, I get it, it's business reasons. No, don't gloss over the business reasons. The business is why we're here. So it's just like, you know, GitLab moved the cheese and we're able to do this. And then we moved it again and we're able to do this. So if we would have never moved that cheese, you wouldn't be working here today. Like if there was a way to like share the GitLab story, and I know I've seen little bits and pieces, like this is how we started, but like these are the changes that we've had to go through. This is the history of all of our change, so that people aren't so afraid of the change. It's like after reading the story, you get it, right? So it'd be cool if we had our own moving the cheese story.
You always explaining the why is important, and knowing the history on change. It doesn't necessarily make it easier to absorb it, but it makes it easier to understand it, which I guess does make it easier to absorb it and act on it. Okay, any other thoughts or impressions on the first half of the book?
In the context of reorgs at GitLab, one thing that could be helpful is like helping people sniff the cheese, because like as a team member, we don't really necessarily have insights to what might be coming sometimes. So I feel like there may be something we can do there for transparency. For example, one thing that I appreciated, I think today, Eric, the EVP of engineering, he posted his fiscal year direction for this year. And he said that, hiring is going to ramp up and you should prepare yourself. And I guess that's one example I see of sort of letting people smell the cheese. This is coming. It's not now, but it's coming.
Yeah, and it's a great
yourselves.
example. It's easy to forget how much time. I know if for folks who were around when we were in, we slowed down hiring about a year ago, and before then, managers spend 50% of their time. We're spending 50% or more of their time on hiring activities, and the individual contributors, the engineers who are doing interviews as well, a large percentage of their time. And it's good to get a heads up on that, right? That is going to increase. It's a good point. We're not going to hire, at least currently, as quickly as we were, more than a year ago, but it is going to start ramping up again. So that's a good point, Ali. Other things, that's great. So other things of where things are coming, so it's time to sniff the cheese. Gosh, trying to think from my perspective, and nothing jumps out at me of like things I'm aware of that and so yeah, nothing I can think of. I don't know, Darva or Neil or Parul or anything else of, you're seeing kind of signals of, this is coming. Maybe I should be maybe myself or others should be thinking about it.
So Wayne, I'm looking through that list you had put in of the quotes, the excerpts that you found. I really like the imagine yourself enjoying the new cheese, like picturing yourself in that situation. Is this something I'm looking forward to or not, and why? It's sort of like smelling the cheese, but envisioning smelling the cheese.
I think the one thing that I'm like is sometimes really hard to do, like in your career when you're like on a journey, like a long-term journey, is like showing people what the cheese is, even because like being on the data team, data like obviously has like unlimited opportunities and it can do a lot for us, but like it's a long-term journey just to get there, and getting people bought into what the end value or like the end cheese is like really hard, where you're like, hey, no, I can give you a little bit of cheddar right now, but do you really want cheddar, or do you want a whole like wheel of brie? Like, and I think sometimes we're not very good at always painting out what the cheese is and like how we're gonna get to it, like whether it's like, hey, we're gonna go down this maze and try this path out and then refactor if we need to. But I'm thinking about that, where I'm like, what is the cheese sometimes in what we're doing? So
I find that our culture makes it really hard. We move so fast sometimes, so it's like they might roll something out because they want to get it out quickly because we're so quick and we iterate so much. So you might forget a few steps on the way to rolling out and shock people they haven't had a chance to sniff it. And also I feel like this manager of one, it feels like department of one. like one department has so much independence because we're managers of one, that they might not necessarily communicate or work together with the other departments because that collaboration might take too long and then we wouldn't be iterative. So it seems like sometimes our values conflict a little bit with the slow rollout, the long explanation. It seems like it's a competing challenge there.
To add to the point of not knowing what the cheese is, I think that's a really important problem to tackle, because like intrinsic motivation is very important to our jobs. And like if you don't know what the cheese is, then like you might be told to like go down this hallway, but you might not have as much motivation as if you knew that I'm looking for this cheese and I'm gonna go down this hallway, and then I'm gonna like it's one step in the journey towards the cheese. Cheese being, I guess, a long-term goal or a project.
One thing that I would love, I feel like something's coming and I would love to get a heads up, is training. They developed this new L&D system. I don't think it was just for the one did training, right? And so I think we mentioned before, it'd be nice if we had a training calendar so that we kind of know what training is going to be, even if they didn't know the dates, like what training is going to be offered, this year that's going to be required. Because I was looking at the remote certification. I think they just put that into the L&D system. But if they knew like what training we'd have this year, that'd be nice to know, instead of, okay, have this done by the end of the quarter. So that'd be nice to know.
Good stuff. Any impressions or ideas that came out of the book so far? All right, so please just take the summary of your thoughts. If you haven't put them in the issue, I think it'd be great for the folks who couldn't make things synchronously today. Of course, I'll post the recording too. Add your thoughts, not of course everything you said, but just add the summary of your thoughts if you haven't done so already in the issue when you get a chance. I think that'd be great. And we'll talk again in a week on the last half of the book. Have a great day and stay warm.
All right, see you
See you,
later.
everyone. Bye.